Hunger gnaws at you, eats away your strength, carves your muscles into bones. The plains of Wallachia left us crestfallen. The men started eating clover only to see that act was driving them insane. God was deserting us. My sadness and stomach were seldom placated by my thrice daily prayers.
We are traveling on the grand pilgrimage of the First Crusade. It started with a lot of enthusiasm and hope. It started with some false piety and some malicious intent, but it certainly has become a more brutal affair as we continue to march on the green path here, approaching Bulgaria and the protectorate there, but still traveling through Serbia. And we should have handled this diplomatically and dealt with the King of Hungary, offered him our own indulgences, from the paper bowl, forgiveness of his sins, if he could have escorted our people quickly through. But instead, we went willy-nilly, got lost, and ended up thinking that we've gone far enough when we hadn't. And the local barons now are just hiding inside of their castles. There is little to eat, and there is little offered to us. It's spring. There is no harvest yet. Field workers have gathered up the livestock ahead of our arrival, have gone to higher locales. We need a direct route. We need to find out where we're going, and we're just hoping for any succor we could possibly get if we can reach the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire at Constantinople. Some places we encounter sheriffs flanked by bowmen that tell us to take other crossroads and even move past and avoid other counties. We are seesawing back and forth, lost in the Balkans here. Now the West had many very good Roman roads. This area in here, which was only conquered briefly by the Romans, it had very few, and those mile markers have probably been removed by now in anticipation of just keeping us away from certain counties. And so we have no clear defined path, and malnutrition is hitting. So we have to make some sort of kingly deliberations amongst ourselves of whether or not we're going to even just give up on this quest. So here comes my die roll. At 6. I consult with an NPC, probably Alexander, Walter the Penniless, and Walter Pousset. And we have a parlay between us, and we have a pity contest, a pity party. And yet, together we decide that no, the righteousness of our cause is worthy of continuing. I may even add my brother Bart, to this discussion.
My brother Bart was adamant our actions had failed. We didn't march with enough incense and song. I chastised his resignation. Walter Pousset sided with my brother. He said we have made our point. The Turk were chastised. We did our part. I knew we had not even left Christendom, the lands of Europe. We had far to go, and our resolve must remain strong. Leave this mess to the Normans, people were pleading. I am a Norman, spoke Alexander Noshan. He sided with me to continue. The deciding vote would be Walter the Penniless. He started off saying he was not going to let the Normans alone reap the spoils for our progress. The heavy lifting is done. These Normans will seize our reward. Walter Pousset left him gobsmacked as he opened the coffer containing the pearls. That treasure was not public knowledge, even in our command circle. Now all 5 of us had a perfect reason to retreat. We could share and be rich. As the Burgundian held out the container, I wondered if he actually intended to share. That money will buy us arms when we reach the lands of the Turk, miles away. We have all of Bulgaria to cross. This may not have engendered any sympathy. Still, we remain 2 votes to continue and 2 to abandon. Walter the Penniless had to decide. He may have reasoned that this treasure was not enough, only a taste of the riches he might obtain. He pulled out a gold drachma from the chest and flipped the coin. Heads, he declared. We continue. We all knew the coin had faces on both sides. And it counts as an automatic roll. That's 6 is a terrific roll in Quintessential Paladin. By consulting with the NPCs, I have gained yet another of my icons. And now I have 2 fostering faith. We fight the de facto scourge of malnutrition and the sheer destitute nature of our ranks. My edict to forego all your coinage and all your valuables has left that we can't even reasonably barter. Added to this is the fact that the Children's Crusade, which I'm leading, is now 100,000 strong, or I should say 100,000 starving. Just a huge amount.
We find out, we get a report, narratives that are coming to us that the last of the refugees of our army are just burning wherever they enter. There's no food, and so they're burning fields that are yet to be planted. They're burning villages, burning whatever they find. It just to make them feel better. They're starting fires. So the various high lords, especially the king of Hungary, Kalaman, the bookworm, he decides that enough is enough, and so he is attacking us from the other side. So we are here approaching the border of Bulgaria, and King Kalaman is up here attacking our rear, slowly massacring all the stragglers.
Brother Bart reported back to Gottschalk and Arlem, his German contingent, about the gold and pearls. He may have even shown them that plunder. The expectation of riches now became the motivation for our march. The mercenaries demanded more pay and more right to pillage. Walter Pousset started personally guarding the command tent and told me that the Swabian, Count Emich von Leninger, was seen snooping about. I was too busy. A bishop arrived. The pontiff interceded to protect an enclave of Jews. He brought them into his own gardens, let them congregate in the aisles of his church, offered them sanctuary and a chance to be baptized. Emich's name was mentioned. The Swabians were notorious for his cruelty. Cutting the throats of anyone with a long beard, anyone of a strange dress had to be a Turk. The Swabians stormed the archbishop's palace and slaughtered 500 people who had taken shelter there. Over the next few days, 300 more hostages were murdered to drive home a point. Pay your ransom or watch your heritage die. The Germans laid siege to Jewish villages one after the next. Even when ransom was paid, the Swabians broke into houses demanding more. Each commander wanted a chest of treasure equal to that held in the command pavilion. I should have tossed the money, given it away. Still, I convinced myself we needed proper arms. Who can fight with their bare hands? Many of the persecuted Jews chose a quick, self-inflicted death to the more agonizing doom of Christian charity. Suicide was prohibited. Many families killed instead their elderly brethren, the children, and then each other as heads of households. 1,000 Jews alone died in Mainz. Some did convert to Christianity, but in the end, most lost everything regardless.
The Germans, under my brother, are in the vanguard. They're moving forward. They want to be the first there to loot and the first there to reach the virgin villages to eat well. If there's any cattle that are left alive, cows left alive, they're killing them. All the pigs are being consumed, all the ducks and waterfowl, whatever we come across, we're eating. Every pond is losing all of its turtles and frogs. The most pious and weakest, who are even true just pilgrims, are not really part of an armed enclave. They're just making their way as a final act or as an act of piety to the Holy Land. They're starting to be arrested and sold as slaves, put into permanent serfdom in Russia. Russia at this time, serf and slave were synonymous. In the Western France, the serfs were starting to get just a modicum of rights in that they could trade landlords, but the serfs in Russia and Hungary, they were locked to the land. They were not allowed to travel. I'm just feeling demoralized. So many pious men, especially the most fragile among us, the old and the infirmed, and those that are just being brought along on crutches, are being arrested, slain by Kalaman. And I have this divine moment of doubt. I'm going to pray for grace to see this through, and I'm turning the character from an opportunist to more of a good Catholic. Only righteous men can do these acts and accomplish these goals. Think about that for a moment. The people of the Crusade actually thought they were so righteous that they needed to kill Muslims in order to prove their faith. That should scare many of my listeners, I hope. It certainly frightens me to think about it. But I'm going to roll a dice roll here, more deliberation. Going to roll a kingly deliberation again. Back to back to back sixes. Thank you, Roll20. I consult again with Alexander Noshon, and he comforts me. He introduces me to another NPC, David the Houndsman. He walks me through the pilgrims, the reverence they show me. We decide that we're going to break apart the Children's Crusade into smaller elements. We're not going to travel as a mass, and we're going to start blessing these smaller companies to send them forth.
I overheard 2 German mercenaries calling my Peregrini Christi the expendable troops. The pilgrims themselves preferred the title of plebs pauperum, poor people of Christ. Eventually, we were called Tafur by Christian and Muslim. I was walked out among those encamped. The pox pilgrims went silent as I strolled among them. I offered prayer to meager meals, boiled grass shared with the weakest eating first. We remain the soldiers forgotten by the legends, even our knights deemed ignoble. My troops reveled in their state of poverty. Their only reward was salvation. Our weapons were fashioned from the woods, pointed sticks and crude axes. Most marched barefoot and refused to carry shields to honor Michael. We never camped with a legitimate army of mercenaries. Our food was scavenged. Incredible deprivations, sickness, and sores attested to our faith. Yet despite any appearance, we would become shock troops, the equal to the armored knights. We would be feared. I'd walk the terrain ahead. Few places would allow mounted attack. My Tafur will be the most ferocious, certainly the bravest, to fight in any crusade. Ahead, I saw Alex's de facto squires, 2 Great Danes. Their handler was David the Houndsman. He explained how he came to know Alexander. My dog saw him dragging the barding of his dead horse. This land is not healthy for large animals. David quoted the Bible, Sermon on the Mount. If salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. I told the knight to leave the metal behind, but he continued dragging his plight, exhausted. If he would haul this talisman, I would help him carry the cross. I harnessed the dogs to drag the chain about. In a few days, sense returned to the nobleman. Alex tossed the whole. Except for this headpiece, I kept that. David pulled the chain cowl over his head and bared his teeth. We all shared one of the few laughs. The Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. That's not us. Peacemakers? Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Perhaps. Blessed are the poor of spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That could be our hope. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Indeed, we were all expecting to soon see God.
Alexander, who's actually a Greek himself, he says we should meet up at Adrianople. There's the remains of a temple there, the ruins of a pagan temple, that we can take sanctuary there in Thrace. And so we make the decision to spread the word that the Pax, Peregrini Christi, will no longer be moving as a massive force. We're going to break apart and go make our way, and our best expedient method, to monasteries, eastern Greece, and we're going to meet up at Adrianople. The main body of my brother finally reaches the borders of Bulgaria. We've reached the town of Sofia. The Germans decide once again to quarrel with the townspeople there, and they set a cluster of mills on fire. A mill is an effort. When a town builds a mill, whether it's wind-powered or water-powered, it is a significant event to be able to grind the grain yourselves rather than send it away to be ground and have a tax applied to it and sent it back. And the Germans start to burn the mills. This is spreading both the chaos and the misery of hunger, because you're not just saying, I'm hungry now. You're saying to these villages that you burn their mills, nobody is going to eat again. These are the end times. We go right into Revelations. We're in a Revelations moment where we are the sword. We are the dragon descending from the sky, burning all in its path. My brother refuses to hold the Germans in check. These guys, they've amassed a kingly fortune. I decide that there's only one thing I have to do. I have to get the emperor to come and stop these Germans. So I'm deciding to tell the emperor he needs to slaughter the very crusaders, the very mercenaries that he sent out letters petitioning to come and help him. I send my agent Alexander to Constantinople ahead. I give him the best horse that we can find since he had lost his own horse. I send him out ahead, and he's going to reach Constantinople. He's going to contact the emperor there, and he's going to try to convince the emperor to come out and quell the Germans.
Alexander did not protest when he was wetted down like a horse and groomed with coarse brushes that any farrier might use on a mane. The soap stung eyes, mouth, and open sores, of which he had several. He never did receive his own garments back, graciously accepting cotton tunic and silk hosiery as replacement. Alex picked up a dirty length of rope to girdle himself, suspended a dented cup, and attached an empty change purse. He pricked his finger and painted a cross over his heart with the blood. The attendants shook their heads. A dog cleaned at nearly the same time was also rolling in filth. With the delousing complete, Alexander moved in escort along the maze of halls, through doors small and ornate and others large and unadorned, before he was deposited unceremoniously in a carpeted room with just one exquisitely painted chair. An overweight retainer dripping in gold and wearing a billowing silken robe entered soon after. The man half bowed, his weakly outstretched arms easily read the intent as dismissive. The courtier lifted his robe and revealed disfigured genitalia. "Will you make similar sacrifice?" he asked incredulously, "or would you instead lose your left hand?" He was making neither a threat nor a joke. "This mistake has been mine," explained the attendant. "You have sat upon the throne used only by our emperors in this summer dormitory. Has been that way for 700 years. No one has sat in the room except of royal succession." The carved wood chair was demolished as Alex watched, the parts ignited in a brazier. Despite this, he would receive his audience in the Byzantine court. Her Supreme Majesty, Princess Anna Comnena, met with him. She used her Latin but switched to Greek when Alexander proved he was fluent. My mother's servants were all Greek. The princess assumed educators. She resisted adding anything pleasant, even as she wanted to know more about this man and his interesting background. Alex continued after a pause. "She was given to my father to secure a truce and dutifully brought 5 children into this world, all by rape. She never let any of us forget our place as chattel, mere elements of that treaty." The princess feigned disinterest. Soon came her reply. "Undoubtedly she beat you whenever she crossed paths. Kindness will cripple a man. Consider yourself lucky to be schooled in Eastern values." I wept not upon her death. "My agents have spoken of your demeanor, a cold-hearted killer. My father is in need of many, but far fewer, so I'm told, will arrive." Each had little more to say, but Her Majesty promised to help the poor people of Christ. Her father would tell the Princess Comnena that the King of Hungary was already marching to Sofia. Any diplomatic intercession might be too late.
We're facing the king, Kalaman, the now not so book-learned and more of a warrior king. He's coming to attack us from the north, and our own German mercenaries were engaging in skirmishes and brawls in the south. And at this point, I had amassed a significant war chest. If you secretly looked at my pavilion, I had a nice footlocker filled with real coins. I told my membership that they should not have coins, but that meant on their purse. Sort of a animal fart moment here. You're not going to sleep in beds with sheets. We're not allowed to have coins, but the crusade needs coins. I mean, we're going to have to pay bribes, eventually buy arms. And so Walter Pousset and 500 of his men decide to take my coin box and drag it away on their own. And I end up with the other Walter the Penniless, and as few as 500 of my followers hiding in the mountains, believing that we're the only survivors. And I'm going to roll on kingly deliberations, which seems to be the theme of this episode. And I'm going to find out if Alexander can convince Alexius, the emperor. A 3, I'll gain a critical deed to foster faith, yet lose my plot armor. Okay, well, I've lost my plot armor. I haven't used it yet, and now I lose it before I use it. Now I have to do a critical deed. Now, as a critical deed, as a man of justice, a critical deed, I can obtain that, but it's a tough table. I can only do it by do something, anything. I will roll 1 die here and add 1 to the dice roll, and there's a lot of bad things that can happen. But let's find out if I can roll 1 die here and add 1 to my dice roll. I'm up on a hill. Wow, did you see that 6? When all hope is lost, then I will appear. It's no wonder that Tolkien as well wrote these sort of passages. As a historian and a linguist, he would know of these events that were happening in the Dark Ages.
Now, just a note on the Dark Ages poetry. It was not really the sing-song poetry of rhyme that most of us are used to. The best surviving example, Brunninburh, was a cadence of hard inflection and soft descriptions. There were lots of analogies like whale roads for seafaring. The pattern was a series of words, then 2 words of the same consonants to end a stanza, then 2 words to start a stanza, then a word to start and the same consonant to end. Ba 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 ba, a, A ba ba ba, A ba 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 A. Glorious Earl Ethelstan ruled rightly the barons, slain as he slept. Usurper, crown craven, tax traded the whale road, killed many his kin. War ravaged region, cried clergy peace a deal, treaty of treachery.
Quite inspiring, but that is going to be that critical deed, that roll of a 7, 6 plus 1, because I am still destined, even though I lost my plot armor this episode. And I've made my critical deed, which means Alexander Nochon, the Frenchman born in Greece. He rides alone to Constantinople. He meets and contacts Anna Comnena, princess who runs the domestic affairs for her father. And together they petition Emperor Alexius to allow the Crusaders to camp safely outside the city.
A second army came from the south. All escape was cut off. The Germans might have surrendered, but they had never offered quarter nor expected the same. I and my small bodyguard joined them for the end. Yet behold, Nicetas, governor of Ni, well, maybe former governor since we burned that city. Nicetas called for parley and instructed Colomon to stand down, withdraw back to his borders. These men are under protection of the Roman Emperor Alexius. The remaining pilgrims were saved.
He wants to hear what I, as Peter the Hermit, have to say, and about the papal bull and about the indulgences that I bring with me. I will then move on. On July 12th, my remaining Catholic Crusaders reach Sofia, and from there they are proceeded under imperial escort to Constantinople, and they will arrive there on August 1st. Now, what I thought was a total massacre of my 100,000 actually turns out to be only 25,000 MIA, most of them captured by King Colomon and sold into serfdom slavery for the rest of their lives. Others die of hunger and deprivation, and others are simply slaughtered by the armies and forces involved. But only 1/4 of my number are murdered and captured and sold as slaves. I soon replaced the 25,000 that I lost with another 25,000 directly from the capital at Constantinople, because people are just compelled by this idea that we can march and retake Jerusalem and free it from the Muslims. Even though, for all intents and purposes, the Muslims were actually allowing pilgrims to travel to the Holy Lands unopposed. The Muslim rulers, the sultans of several different sub-regions along the way, not just the Turks, they welcomed pilgrims. They saw all of us as people of the book, is what they called us, all of us righteous men. It's actually a vibrant society when you allow pilgrims to come, because they bring trade, they bring wealth, they're tourists. They travel all the way through Jerusalem and back, and they're unopposed. It also is indicative that the area is not prone to thievery. So it speaks well of these kingdoms that they would allow others to come in holy act and righteous act. But somehow that got a little twisted by the politics of both Alexius, who lost most of Asia Minor to the Seljuk Turks, and by the Pope, who wanted to eliminate his nightly problem in Europe. We end up, the majority of us, escape the ravages of Colomon's reprisals, and we go under the guidance of Alexander, and we move from Adrianople to the outskirts of Constantinople.
Since Constantinople's founding in 330 Anno Domini as the eastern capital of the Roman Empire under Constantine the Great, a 40-foot-high wall surrounded the entire city. An even more impressive double line of the Theodosian walls was built in the 5th century, impregnable against sieges of Avar, Sassanian, Arabs, Rus, and Bulgars. That was until one man, Orban, was cheated. He was Wallachian, an oppressed people who hated the emperors. Orban initially offered his services to the Byzantines, but in 1452, Constantine XI refused to pay Orban his price for forging the largest siege cannons ever created. Sultan Mehmet II was not so nearsighted. The gunmetal was smelt in Adrianople over 3 months, dragged to the city by 60 oxen, and there fired a miserable 7 times before the cannon exploded and killed the crew, with Orban in attendance. Yet 7 sections of the Great Wall were destroyed, one for each time it fired. The city was attacked through the breach created and subsequently lost, yet that happens 400 years after my Peter's tale.
Me and my bodyguard are the first to enter Constantinople officially as part of the reconnoiter. Now, Alexander has already been there. If I was actually playing the character of Alexander, I could bring out more of a love interest. If I had written this as a novel, I probably would have written it from his perspective, but it makes more sense as a game to play it as Peter the Hermit's perspective. While my main body continues to trickle to the staging area and then move downward to the mighty walls under escort under a more official route with way stations and food supplies set up, I enter the city to cheering throngs. I get this incredible welcome from the populace, but none of the aristocrats. I realize that the place is very welcoming, but it's very Byzantine, the very nature of the word. There is a palace and there is a complex that is impenetrable. The lords and the ruling party, they live totally separate from the populace that live in the greater city of Constantinople. Constantinople, it's the largest castle in Europe. Most of the castles in Europe, they were just wooden palisades. They would look more like a frontier fort in colonial period Williamsburg. Constantinople had stone walls. It could be considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. But unfortunately, when we're there and we're waiting for any sort of audience with the emperor as I continue every day to write petitions, please, the Children's Crusade needs just a small amount of support. I found out that Walter the Penniless is killed in a bar fight when he refuses to pay his gambling wages. Well, this does give us reprieve. When Walter, one of our lords and one of the leaders of our crusade, is actually killed, the king feels compelled that he has to give an audience then directly to me. I then gain an audience with his daughter, Anna Comnena. The emperor himself is totally influenced by his daughter. Whatever his daughter decides, he would agree with.
The room's walls were a mix of carpet and drape, the inner area bounded on three sides by corridors, which Princess Anna Comnena wandered and conversed. She moved around, Alex and me disguising her exact location. I replied to questions toward where I last heard her speak. Alex's gaze seemed to always know her whereabouts, his instincts keen. She gave up the ruse. A curtain parted and Anna entered. Etiquette ordains I do not directly answer questions, but you may speak your petition. She snorted a laugh when I stated my desire to liberate the holy city of Jerusalem. She shook her chin when I said I was a leader. Adamar is your pope's choice among the Frangi. I wish I had time to read you Thucydides. I predict you will prove to be more Alcibiades than Alexander. I said I know not of these men. Alcibiades rose in power and led the Athenians. He was hated, feared, and murdered. My father hoped to secure a few thousand mercenaries, a quick clash of retaliation. Those nightly deaths a calculated price, smaller than losing his own elite. The greater petition to Rome was a mistake. Now, here you are with more coming. Northern barbarians have arrived. Like the Avar, the Rus, the Bulgars, even Wallachian peasants once tried to lay siege to my city. Our neighbors, the Turks, have made no further inroads. Truth be told, Diogenes was the aggressor. Greeks at Syracuse, mind not if the reference is lost on you, the uneducated. She emptied an ivory jewelry case and held the contents for Alexander and I to see. It was fabulous. With a small tribute from the treasury, much of the farmland lost in Pergamum could be repatriated or the yearly crops bought in perpetuity. Instead, I have a report that 100,000 have already left Regensburg, but even that number is small compared to the forces assembling at Toulouse and Flanders. She methodically listed the place names, watching for a reaction. Lorraine and Normandy. God help you all if the Normans sail from Italy. I believe you know Bohemen. I did not. Well, perhaps I knew some rumors. Alexander answered, he's my uncle. Okay, that was strange and never mentioned. A pirate and brigand who raided my father's lands along the Adriatic. I've read my Tacitus. That Roman describes the murderous nature of the Germans all too well. She frowned and put her jewelry away. Go serve God. Pay the cost with the beating breasts of your servants. Your petition will skip the usual channels, remain but a few days. 800 wagons are not enough to feed your rabble. My father will see you swiftly on your trek.
She is a student of history and she wishes to be the next Thucydides. She even asks us if we've ever heard of Herodotus, and she chuckles at our ignorance. She relates the background of the recent history of the area, that in 1071, Alp Arslan, the Caliph of Baghdad, he kills the Emperor Diogenes and conquers Anatolia, which was once a very wealthy Byzantine province. The remaining army just retreated across into Europe, across the Straits of the Bosporus, settled in the western part of Constantinople. But Alp Arslan could not exploit his victory in the area because he ends up assassinated by internal rivals. And the death of Alp in his murder puts his teenage son, Kiljan, as now ruling out of Nicaea, which is along the coastline. I listened to all this and the rise of the Seljuk Turk, but what mostly I see is that she's talking directly to Alex and she's enamored by him. When she finally gets her attention on me, she says, I'm shorter than she expected and I seem frightfully elderly. She doubts I will even survive the rest of the trip. She says my face seems almost as long and sad as the donkey I ride. Must your garments be absolutely filthy? She is taking pot shots at me. She's maligning me as an affront to force a reaction. If she can get me to overreact or lash out, then she knows the discussions are over and we're nothing but random hooligans who eventually will disperse. But I'm going to make a dice roll here. Once again, we're going to finish this off with kingly deliberations. Let me roll a d6 and a 1. I need to defeat a d6 fell ones. I don't actually shrug it off. I need to keep my composure. But she brings these 6 men in and challenges. As the 6 fell ones, it doesn't have to be physical battle. It has to be sort of a battle of wits. So 6 viziers, 6 wise men are going to come in and question me on my knowledge of the Bible and on Christ's life and on the events that happened. And I decide to totally answer D6, how many questions I'm going to have to answer here? 2 questions from the viziers. Let me make my 2 rolls here, defeating fell ones. Now, I'm going to use tests of my prowess because the tables work that way, but I'm going to go ahead and roll those dice as if I'm facing these men and defeating them in a verbal sophistry rather than actual force of arms. And this is the freestyle method of just allowing the combat tables to reflect a less physical and more mental game that's happening. 2d6. I rolled a 4. A 4 becomes a 5. It's a wise act. I treated with the first question. The lady insists that I don't know where I'm going, but actually I have made a trip of pilgrimage all the way to Palestine, but I was unable to reach the holy city. But I did make it to the outskirts. I just did not feel myself worthy of getting there. So I'm going to treat 5s and 6s, and they bring forth a more senior ambassador, a more wise emissary to question me. And I still have the 2 minor questions and the 1 main question that I answer. Here come my 2d6, and I got a 6 and a 1. I easily dismissed the 2 minor. I face the main ambassador, the main emissary, and I say, I face Anna Comnena herself, and I say that I'm perfectly knowledgeable of the fact that the Muslims have protected pilgrims of all faith. All nations hate thieves, and travelers are a good sign that the roads are maintained and safe. Now, she chides me for keeping company actually with Alexander, and she tells me that his family are notorious pirates of the Adriatic. I look at him because this is a shock to me, and he does not deny it. Well, my sins are all forgiven. His sins are all forgiven, provided we reach the lower tomb. And I will take her faith with me as well, so that, although I doubt it, if she has any sins, however minor they be, I too will pray and absolve her sins should I reach the holy sepulchre. She decides that, okay, let's see if I can make my die roll here. I need to get a 6, 2 dice, and there's my 5, becomes a 6, and I've convinced her that I am a righteous man. She will tell her father to ferry us across the Bosporus and into Asia Minor. And both Alexius, the emperor, and Urban, the pope, they wanted armies, not rabble. Alexius is a smart enough man to know that he's going to lose control of them before they disperse, and it's better to send us off to die at the hands of the Turk. And that actually would work more politically, because the more martyrs he creates slaughtered by the Turk, the more chance that an actual relief would come to help him out. More later.